Today, my guest on the show is Cole Jarvis with Jarvis Media. Let me tell you more about Cole. With experience working at Facebook, TikTok, iHeartMedia, and Coldwell Banker, Cole has developed social media strategies that help real estate agents of all sizes see massive brand growth. Using internal knowledge of how social media platforms operate, Cole knows what works, what doesn't work, and what actually makes a difference for the bottom line of a real estate agent. Leveraging smart content creation and combining it with robust paid advertising, Cole has generated, check this out, almost 500,000 followers, 488,000 followers to be exact, and reached over 39 million prospects for his agents, which are his clients, saving them almost $1 million a year saving them almost $1 million for the cost of hiring an internal social media manager. So he's basically showing agents how to do this without having to hire somebody as a manager, and he gets unbelievable results. I want everybody to check out Jarvis Media at jarvismediaco.com, Jarvis mediaco.com. We will have a link to that in the show notes. Cole, welcome to the show.
Thanks, GJ. Really appreciate it.
I am really excited to chat with you because there's always more that I could learn about effective social media strategy, and also, it's such a changing environment.
Yeah.
There's always updates. There's always things that used to work that don't work anymore. So I'm excited to kind of dive in and get the state of social media marketing these days. I think a lot of agents, have for years have been told you need to post more, you need to post, more frequently, you need to do more video, you need to, ultimately really, create this presence and this consistent presence. But there's not always an easy sort of guide, series of guideposts along the way. You just sort of have to figure out what that is. So I'm excited to kind of dive into some of that today with you. But let's get started with your background. Tell us, like, how did you get into social media?
Yeah. Funny enough, I got into social media via radio in a weird way. It's kind of funny. Yeah, pretty much out of school, I was working at iHeartMedia in upstate New York, where I'm from, and I was like a promotions assistant. We'd go to the concerts and all of these different like shows and stuff like that, and we would help the digital content director get a bunch of content and help him do his strategy for all of the social media stuff that I didn't understand at the time. Shortly after he left, and in the 4 months or so it took them to replace them, I just decided, hey, I'm just going to take on these responsibilities and just kind of get a little a buffer and job security here. And by the time they came around to hire, I was like, wow, I'm kind of already doing this. Let me go ahead and go for it, even though I felt underqualified at the time, and got the position. And I was pretty instantly thrown into this world that I didn't understand. So huge learning curve. Didn't really know anything about algorithms, about making content, SEO. Knew nothing about Photoshop and Premiere, which I grew up in the content world right before Canva and all these
Sure.
amazing tools that would have made my life so much easier. But you kind of you figure it out as you go, and learn that process. It really just fell in love with social media. I went out to LA, just something I'd always wanted to do. Lived with a buddy of mine out there, and I was kind of looking for whatever job I could find. And sure enough, this company that I had no idea what it was at the time, TikTok, was hiring. Uh, that became a really interesting play. I knew they were involved in social media, but I didn't know nearly how big of a player they'd become. So that was awesome. Spent some time at Coldwell Banker, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then ultimately, the experience at TikTok gave me a couple years at Facebook. And then ever since then, I've been kind of doing this on my own. And it's been kind of a wild trajectory, honestly.
It's really impressive that you have, worked at corporate for some of these firms and really get to see, at least to some degree, how the donuts are made, or at least what the thought process is about how the donuts are made. What are the sort of ways in which they organize information, and what are these platforms looking for from content creators. So let's dive into realtors using social media. So I guess the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, what do realtors get wrong about social media?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So, in my from what I've seen with obviously he's talked with a lot of agents all day long. Really, I think the thing that people get wrong, honestly, the biggest one, and it's the biggest hindrance, is just that they think it needs to be perfect.
Mm,
Your social media strategy is not so much, catching lightning in a bottle, as it is a constant process of trial and error. But also just kind of, putting a grain of sand in the bottle as time goes on. I'm sure there's a better analogy, but as time, you really want to build this so that eventually you have so much content, so much goodwill, especially if it's targeting your audience well in your market, that you've built up this goodwill, you've built up this helpful content that's helped people in their social media, or sorry, in their real estate journey, whether they're buying or selling. And then when they are ready to buy or sell, they say, "Hey, well, his content's been helping me all along the way. Why wouldn't I work with him to buy or sell my home?" And that's really the simplest approach, is that, we can take out, and I'm sure we'll talk in detail about all the crazy algorithm stuff and all these little things which can be very helpful, but the meat and potatoes of it is you just want to make stuff that helps people and that puts you in a good light to set you up to be their real estate agent. That's really the end all be all of it.
yeah, and social media really gives us an opportunity to dial that message in, because we're people's attention spans are so shortened that we
Mhm.
have mere seconds. So I know that agents can think, okay, well then my video does need to be perfect because everything I see on Instagram looks perfect, and all the there's filters and production value. And I will I'll not going to answer for Cole, but I will encourage everyone to challenge that is the most effective strategy. As Cole said, the most effective strategy is giving people items of value, things that actually will work for them, because and then the actual production level of the whether it's a video or whatever becomes less important. It certainly is still important, but it is that accurate, Cole, that the content sort of trumps the aesthetic.
Yeah, 100%. It was so funny. A lot of times I've worked with a lot of video production companies in the past with kind of separate, we've helped companies outside of just real estate agents, but we primarily help agents, and usually we're just kind of working with them one on one. But we've worked with a lot of video production partners in different cases, and it's so funny. A lot of these folks who have the best equipment, the best sound, the best lighting. I was just talking on, I think it was on Friday, with a couple folks who run a company out in a video production company out in Austin, and they're saying, "Yeah, we'll purposefully make content lower quality because it
Wow.
resonates in a different way." And my hypothesis is not so much that the lower quality helps; it's actually more so just that the content is so much more important when people see it's something that looks like was filmed on an iPhone, even if it wasn't, or even if it's still a professional company doing it. They feel like this is really user generated content. They feel like it's more real.
Right.
Whereas the more produced content gets, sometimes the more you risk it coming off like a commercial, which
Hmm.
is the antithesis of what people want on social media platforms.
Right. People want to. So that's something that we should really think about discussing right now. Is you just brought up a really great question. Do we want to have commercials on Facebook, Instagram, etc., which outline how our our benefits and features and why we're so amazing? Um, and this isn't a yes no question, although I guess it could be. So do we want to do that, and or do we also want to produce um, use what you would call more impromptu content that isn't as highly produced, isn't as slick, isn't as scripted, but more authentic, and really solve some sort of problem or answers a question that a client might have? Am I sort of understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's a lot of schools of thought when it comes to this. And ultimately, I would say like the real answer to anything in marketing, whether it's social media or otherwise, is testing.
Right.
So the real way is to test it. But the different schools of thought are very interesting. You have the Gary V model, which is the jab, 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 right hook. The
Right.
idea there is you have three great pieces of content that are value driven for every one content that's like, hey, by the way, here's what I do. You can work with me.
Hmm.
That's a strategy that's kind of actually more has become famous really from the TV model. If you
Hmm.
look at how much time you would spend watching the show versus how many times, in like a cable show, you'd get commercials, that's like pretty close to the ratio, if not to
Right.
like, 4 to 5, 4 to 1, maybe more accurate. There's also more of like a slightly more nuanced kind of influencer like model that I think a lot of people have popularized, but Alex Hermosi is one of the folks who've done this really well, which is simply like, give forever. And then ultimately you will receive because you will deposit so much goodwill that people will want to work with you. Both have proven to be super successful. And so you can implement more ad like content as long as the ratio to value is a lot higher. Ultimately, the best approach is to test that. But I actually believe also because real estate specifically is such a competitive space, and sometimes people don't realize it, but I'll tell folks when I'm talking with them, I'm like, listen, you're in your market, you're one of 1,000 real estate agents, all selling the exact same thing for the exact same price. Like that is a competitive market. By definition, there are a few industries that are that competitive. And so I think the more you can be a unicorn, the better. And also, I think it actually lends itself to be more conducive to the schedule of the average agent to just make content more authentically. Just do it with your smartphone. You don't need the fancy stuff. And just try and answer the question, what do I think people are struggling with in my market in real estate? What are questions I'm commonly asked, which lends itself more towards kind of the last thing you had mentioned, the more authentic. Let me just try to solve a problem with content and maybe not make a huge commercial. A lot of different ways to approach it, but I think that last one is the best starting point because it means you don't have to, spend a ton of time doing all of this preparation for like a fancy commercial to produce.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. It's sort of the consumption model of marketing where we just want people consuming our content. So maybe real estate agents should think about, okay, if I want to find clients via social media, if I want to have people reach out to me, of course the answer is yes, you likely do. So if that's true, then what we have to do is think of social media as a stage to which we are now performing for the audience, and what does that audience want, what does that audience need, in what way do they want to receive this, do they want to see pictures, do they want to see video, and again, testing, there isn't answers really, cut and dry answers to all of this. There are of course themes and certainly directions of ways in which technology is heading and consumption changes. But it seems to be that what we really want is just good quality content. How so you said, make a list of questions your clients ask you, essentially. That is one way. What do you think about the, hey, I just sold this house or I just listed this house, those kind of posts? What is your sort of take on those?
Yeah, so it's so funny because I think that the mentality behind posting, "Hey, just sold, just listed," those classic posts that
Yeah.
we see a lot of. If you're an agent, especially if you're looking at other agents' content, the mentality is like, "Well, I just did some great work. I got this great review. I want to showcase it," and innately that makes sense, right?
Sure.
The problem is that it lends itself more to how social media maybe 1.0 was versus
Right.
kind of this social media 2.0 world that we're in. Not that those are, I'm sure people have a better like, phraseology for like the different eras of social media, but the way I think about it, and this was, by the way, I can mark exactly when this happened because I was working at iHeart in that first job when this shifted, and it was a big, hurtful shift. But essentially, it used to be more like social media was almost like building an email list. You'd accumulate an audience, and then once you had that audience, then you could distribute content. And like for the most part, pretty much everyone would be distributed your content, right? Maybe a
Right.
little bit less some days more other, but generally it was accumulate a list and then service that list with your content. That has very much so shifted. And so now, regardless of the amount of followers you have, good or bad, your content is much more of a meritocracy now. You
Right.
have to earn every view now. And in some ways, that's great. Fewer barriers to entry. Some ways, that's really hard. More effort, more time needed to get some great content. And so ultimately, when we create more content that's like, hey, here's all this good work I did, the reason that lends itself to the old model is because, well, people would get your content either way.
Right.
Now, because you have to earn every view, that is really hard to compete that piece of content against somebody's viral cat video, or
Right.
even what most people go on social media for, which is their friends or family, and trying to avoid business content, which is why it's
Sure.
so hard for businesses to really grow organically purely from their content. And so I would say that it's better to lean away from that and maybe strategically sprinkle that in instead. Say, "Hey, I just sold this house for my these folks in this market," and you name your market there because it's helpful for SEO and just for relevancy for your audience. Um, Here's what they struggled with. Here's what we helped them
Yeah.
with, and kind of make it more of a narrative. It takes a little bit more effort than just posting a graphic, but ultimately, that's going to get more viewers for sure.
You brought up a really good point. It's like, what does the audience want? Do audiences really want commercials? Well, the answer isn't no. We certainly accept a certain level of commercial in our life. We see billboards, we watch television, streaming services can have ads as well. So it's not that we don't. I mean, I don't personally love commercials. I think most people don't love watching a commercial, but we
Right.
tolerate it. But I think you're right. So I would tolerate somebody's just listing just sold, and it's nice to see your friends succeed, and all of that is great. But if I'm somebody who I'm looking for maybe new players into my or new leads. I am not, that's probably not going to do the trick. I think
Mm.
if we're looking for new you know new clients, the way to do it is to think about what are those clients searching for online, what problems are they trying to solve.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. I think the biggest difficulty I think most folks have with like a, let's say, a purely organic strategy is just that, one, it takes a lot of effort, and two, it takes a lot of time. And that's tough, especially for most agents who are like, well, I need a listing next month. Otherwise, I'm starting to get worried about, my how far will my previous commission get me?
Right.
And that's where it's really tough, and where it does start to make sense kind of figuring out, of course, where are your efforts best allocated? Now, what's nice about, cold marketing is that, you can always do more. And what I always say is the way to really think about like viewership, for instance, like let's say you get 100 views. Most people would be depressed that they got 100 views on a social media post. But the way to really think about this, especially if you're making content that you know is targeting the right audience, imagine that you had a small amphitheater of 100 people and you could just address them basically whenever you wanted, pretty much at will. That would feel quite powerful. However, on social media, it doesn't feel nearly as powerful because of the fact that we see people with billions and millions of trillions of views, flying all over the place, and it feels like everyone's got an amazing following besides us. So I think that's the important thing, is we do need to separate the mindset, especially between like the influencer who is making content purely just to make content, and that's the whole business strategy, versus an agent who is trying to make content to help more people in their real estate business. And the amount of viewers is not nearly as important as the quality of the viewers. That's always something that is a big tough point for people, I think, to realize. But I think when you do it, A, it makes you feel better, makes you feel more encouraged to make more content. And also, it's a better way to think about it, because you shouldn't compare yourself to the Logan Pauls who are
Sure.
making viral content, or Mr. Beast, for instance, who are kind of going off on these crazy content creation experiences.
So let's talk a little bit about branding, because ultimately, what we're really trying to do is evolve or serve our brand. So every agent is their own brand, I would argue. O- But how should someone start to create an idea if they don't have a well defined brand? What should they do first?
Yeah, great question. So, what I always recommend, and this actually kind of solves two problems in one. So, we want to create a brand. We need to know, okay, what is a brand? A brand is really just an association, right? It's saying, hey, this person represents these values, and that's why I like them or I dislike them, whatever it may be. And so, when we're creating a brand, we know that we need to have a repetition of content, as if we're talking about on social media here, that enforces that brand, that represents whatever those content pillars are. So let's say you're a real estate agent and you're like, hey, I really want to be a no pressure real estate agent. That's the brand I want to establish. Well, you have to make a lot of content and constantly reinforce the fact that, you're there to help people. You're very low key. You're not like, let's say, a Grant Cardone mentality, which is nothing against it, just very different
Ask,
mindset
ask,
there.
ask. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. Did you ask 5 times for the sale?
Right.
So like that happens from repetition. And what's really cool is this solves another problem a lot of folks have. When I talk to a lot of folks, they say, "Okay, well, I need to make content. I have a couple ideas, but what's like the fourth video I make?"
Right.
The nice thing is you don't have to make a novel piece of content every time. And I wouldn't recommend that you even do, because that makes it harder to have a consistent brand. It's really more about having those topics, those content pillars, whatever makes sense for you and whatever's something more authentic for you. That is going to be the best type of content pillars to create, whether it's, I help, let's say, first time home buyers, or I have an agent I work with in Seattle who helps almost primarily medical folks, because it's a big medical community, and also newly divorced women oftentimes. And it feels very niche, but there's a market for that. And she can be kind of the expert in that field in Seattle. And so by repeating that content topics, it tells you what kind of stuff you should talk about, and it makes so you don't have to feel like you have to write a brand new book every time you're getting on video. But it also reinforces the brand as long as it's the right brand that you want to identify with. So, volume and sticking to 2 to 3 content topics, that's really, I think, the kind of where to get started with building that brand.
And the idea is what we want to get people hooked on our content based on certain topics, right? So we want, if I was doing a daily post in the recruiting realtor space, because that's where I play, I might have a broker tip or agent tip of the week on Monday. Tuesday might be, I don't know, could be other things, right? So we could have different topics, different days of the week. Um, let's ask a really fun question, which you get asked all the time: is which social media platform should I be focusing on?
Yes, I get this all the time. And it's my answer is probably not what most people think. I think most people expect me to say Facebook or sorry, TikTok or YouTube. Honestly, it's whatever platform that you are currently on the most, because all of these platforms, they all have the exact same business model pretty much, which is just the more people stay on the platform, the more ads they see, the more money that platform makes. So they reward content that makes people want to stay longer.
Sure.
So that's the business model on and whatever platform we're on. Now they have different features and yeah, slightly different things. YouTube's more of a search engine. TikTok's like more primarily short form. So you have all of that, but it's such a barrier to entry to make a lot of content. And the best way you can grow is the fastest way is to make a lot of content. You should really just be focused on trying to get rid of as many barriers to entry as possible. So if you're on Instagram every day, let's say, make Instagram content. Don't worry about the other platforms. Focus on where your strength already is, because you already know that platform. It's less of a learning curve and it should be a quicker process to make it because you'll feel more comfortable. Whereas if you're like, oh, I got to figure out how to make Facebook videos and I have to figure out how to do the SEO for YouTube that I've never done, it's less likely you're going to do it, which means you're going to make less content. You're going to learn slower and it's going to be harder to compete. So ultimately, it's less about in my experience, it's less about the platform and like the tips and tricks and little algorithm differences they have, far more about how do we make this practical for your busy schedule.
Yeah, and if anyone's out there listening and thinking, I don't know where my clients or my friends, where they spend the most amount of time, what social platform they're using, ask them. Do
Yeah.
a survey. Say, hey, do you use TikTok? If so, how often? Every day? What's your go-to social media app? And you could ask that as a single question. That would probably tell you everything you wanted to know. What is your go-to social media app? You could send that out to all of your sphere of influence, and that will give you a pretty good idea of where the people already in your sphere are hanging out.
Yeah, that's a great it's a great tip, and I think 100%. And also, just you should always be talking with folks who you think are your target market, because you'll never not learn enough for it to be worth it.
Yeah.
But also the nice thing too, a lot of times people say, "Oh well, Facebook's dead, right? I should probably ignore that platform." There's 300 million active users in the US alone, monthly active users on Facebook. Like, that's basically, we're getting close to the population of the US
Right.
is a monthly active user on the platform. So the platform that people think are is dead has a ton of people on it. So I think pretty much every platform outside of maybe like TikTok, just because it skews very young, but I'm sure that will change very soon, is pretty much almost guaranteed to have your demographic on it. It's far more about how do you stand out on the platform than it is, am I making sure this is the perfect platform for me, at least in my
Well,
experience.
yeah, let's talk about standing out in the whatever platform you end up using. So, how should someone think about, rising above maybe some of the other content, getting because you said something very important. You said sort of social media 1.0 was, you sort of get your group together and then you can feed that group with your content. Well, now everyone is so interconnected that people's groups aren't really their groups anymore because they are in a million other groups as well, and you're sort of competing for attention. And Facebook now, when you talked about, you post a video, you might only get 100 views, and that might feel like a failure, when in reality that might be 100 people who might consider using you as a client. And maybe if 10% of them use you, that's 10 out of 100. That's a really good return on investment, if that were to happen. I don't think you would get 10 clients out of 100 views, but the point is now what you really have to do is there's so much signal to noise. You have to figure
Yeah.
out how to rise above. So how does somebody start to think about, because if we post a just listed, just sold, or video, and we don't get a bunch of engagement, that can feel crummy, right? Just like you were saying. So part of what is getting the mindset of, there isn't failure or success, there's just result. And also, I'm not comparing myself like, to Mr. Beast or Logan Paul, like you had said, but also figuring out, figuring out how to sort of showcase your content, or why the social media platforms would showcase your content above someone else's. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great thing to dissect. So it is 100% true that, people obviously want to stand out. And we've talked about it's a very competitive field. So that's very crucial, especially in the purely organic social media world, right? If we're not running any kind of like ad campaigns, then our organics really got to stand on its own, right? As a to be worth our time investment. I find there's two separate kind of mindsets about standing out. There's standing out in terms of like social proof,
Mhm.
whereas like you can be the most viewed agent in your market and you can be the most let's say followed agent in your market. And with that comes a lot of credibility. Even and I talk with folks about this all the time. They say, okay, well, if we're in the social media 2.0 world, well, what good is followers? Followers are still great. It's like having a lot of reviews.
Yeah.
It shows people, hey, there's a lot of people who back this person who have invested time and value their content. It's not easy to get subscribers or to get followers. That gives you an advantage over somebody with like 100 followers. It's a very true. There's actually a, without getting too much into the weeds, there's a social media ad strategy where you simply put out an ad and the first objective, the first goal of the ad is just to get a lot of engagement, so that when you convert it into a ad that tries to drive traffic or tries to get leads or whatever, it's got a lot of social proof, a lot of people liking and commenting,
Ah.
just to actually increase the conversion rate. So it's a tried and true strategy. And that kind of brand awareness, social proof aspect of standing out is very strong. Now, that's one way to think about things, and that strategy would be very different. Another one is, how do I stand out purely to my ideal customers? Whereas, like you were saying, DJ, maybe I only get 100 views, but if these 100 views are really qualified folks, that could be plenty of business for me for a year, depending on the market and all of that kind of stuff. So, you can stand out by being the biggest, or you can stand out by just targeting the best, being the most accurate. And what's really cool is that the algorithm makes it very easy to get in front of people who want to watch your content. Oftentimes we say, people say, oh, the algorithm didn't like my post, or YouTube didn't like this, or Instagram didn't like this. The best way to think about this stuff is that replace the word algorithm with audience. say, no, my audience didn't like it. Because remember, these platforms live or die by how long people stay on them. So they're very good at giving people content that they want to see. So we should trust in the power of that algorithm to serve the right kind of content to the right kind of folks because it's in their inherent, benefit. And so if we make a video that's, hey, here's this really specific tip about, selling a house in, um, you know, upstate New York, for instance, where I'm at, we know that people who see that are really going to be interested in it, whether that's 1,000 or 100. And so sometimes getting fewer viewers is actually a good strategy, depending on how you want to look at it. Most people want to be the biggest and the best, and that's totally cool. It just takes a different level of input there, and a lot of times, the tricky thing with like, especially when we talk about platforms like Instagram, there's a lot of bot followers and like follow buying like strategies going on that makes it almost useless to try to compete in purely that world. But you can run hybrid strategies where you get a lot of viewership that's real viewership and can help you be the most viewed agent in your market. And that's actually something that we do with some clients depending on what their needs are.
Yeah, I was thinking about if you live in Syracuse, and if I was to move to Syracuse, and I've driven through Syracuse, but I've never spent time in Syracuse. So this is a really good example because I know virtually nothing about Syracuse. So other than other than the basketball, other than that, other than the university, I my first question or my first uh, Google search might be, or one of my first Google searches would be best neighborhoods in Syracuse, or best restaurants, or best schools, or best shopping, or where are the safest areas, things that any homeowner with whether they have a family or not are going to want to know prior to moving into an area. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, what we could do is start creating those hyper specific answers to questions, like, and you can even get more granular than where in Syracuse should I live, being like, let's explore this neighborhood this time, and let's talk about this neighborhood or this street, or even you can get as detailed as you want. But are we talking about going that deep into, like, hey, let's talk about this neighborhood today?
Yeah, I think 100%. And that's really, it's a great way to look at it because depending on a lot of people deal with this where they're like, well, maybe I'm in a highly sought out destination. And funny enough, Syracuse was never that. But nothing against Syracuse. It's just, we're an exporter of snowbirds to places like Florida, generally speaking. However, we have like a large large, massive chip manufacturing company building a huge factory here. So we're going through a really interesting period where now agents are like, well, now I can actually target viewers in the rest of the states, who might be moving here for that
Yeah,
massive infrastructure growth. And it's interesting. So we're seeing a lot of agents kind of going through that right now. But even if you're in an area that it's far more you're
that
helping
people aren't
somebody.
moving into necessarily. Yeah,
Right, right. But that's why it's so important to know your audience because then
yeah,
maybe you want to make content that's kind of more wide reaching for folks kind of coming there. Or in a lot of cases, you're helping somebody go from, like let's say if they're already like in like the LA area roughly, maybe you're helping somebody go from like Studio City to Burbank, right?
yeah.
It's like the same basic thing, right? It's going to be slightly different town cultures and that kind of stuff. And so it's really important to know your audience. But yeah, when we get granular with our content, it helps us really, of course, pinpoint people who are specifically in that. Like, let's say the chances of you saying, "Hey, I'm the best real estate agent in Burbank, work with me," and getting like a real client from that is way less so than like, "Hey, I just helped somebody in Burbank buy this kind of house. It was their dream home because they were looking for this kind of cultural living and these kinds of benefits and all that stuff that Burbank's known for. We had an amazing experience. We looked at all this stuff." That kind of more narrative driven before and after kind of content targeting people specifically looking to move to Burbank, it's way more powerful and way more likely to get real tangible results for folks. So I say the more granular you can go, the better.
Yeah. So getting really hyper specific. So I once interviewed a top realtor who was in a smaller, more rural area. I mean, it wasn't a super small market, but it wasn't a destination people would be, wanting necessarily to move into in
Mm.
any sort of mass scale, like a Nashville or a Charleston or Austin or these sort of hot spots where people are moving these days. So she goes, well, people aren't really moving in here, but she goes, people move up within my within my geographic area. So in other
Yeah.
words, people buy their first house typically over around this area, and then they're thinking about what's if that's not their forever home, where's their next house. And so she started making content going, hey, where's here's some ideas for your next house in XYZ area.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, again, you have to be conscious of who you're targeting. And that's why people say in the social media world, niche down. And a lot of times the thought is like, well, I don't want to isolate myself from people. Like, I don't want somebody who wants to live in Culver City to see my Burbank content.
Right.
Apparently we're a whole LA geography show now. But I don't want somebody to see my content and then think, oh, well, they only help people in Burbank. But the misstep there is that your content only really has a shot to be competitive if you can really be niche and stand out, because otherwise, something that, Dwayne the Rock Johnson post is going to be next. Forget about the other agents in your
Right.
market. It's
Right.
going to be people, it's going to be these crazy people spending millions of dollars making content like Mr. Beast or millions of other folks who have an unfair advantage in the social media content world. So the best thing we can do is say, I want to work with people who want to live in Burbank. Let's talk about the specifics in Burbank and also what maybe somebody needs to know if they're ready to buy or sell. So that when I get in front of the people who are ready to buy or sell, algorithmically, they should be more likely to see my content. And when they do, they say, wow, this person is explaining my exact scenario right now. Why would I not work with them?
Now let's talk about if we do have a question of a niched down question that we're trying to answer for via social media. Maybe it's why should I live in Burbank, or what are the reasons that people choose to live in Burbank? And let's say we're going down that path. How do we determine sort of how long a video should be? Let's talk about length and frequency. So if we want to
Yeah.
do a now again, you could make a million different videos about living in Burbank. Do you recommend making longer form of videos where we address many questions, or shorter form videos that address just one question and then making more videos, for each question has its own video?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of times people think, hey, I want to take like a longer form content because then I can cut it down into a lot of short form content. That, from an efficiency perspective in terms of editing, makes perfect sense, especially if you already have an audience. But for a lot of folks, their content, they might not know what really works yet. And that's where testing is so important. And I would say test with not only the content that's easier to make, that you can make more of, so you can make more tests and get a better result, but also just the thing that tests better is short form content. The reason for that is purely short form video content, to be specific. The reason for that is because, one, video is just, it's the best way to communicate a brand, just because you're taking care of all the sensory elements that we
Right.
can actually use. But then also, it's the fastest way to transfer authenticity. And on top of that, there's a huge algorithm benefit to it, right? Everyone's competing to be the short form platform right now. And so when you do that, it's easier to get tests. And the reason why you'll get like 3-1 or 4-1 or 5-1 views on a short form versus a long form is because it's less of a commitment.
Right.
I think a lot of times when we make content for people, we think, well, this is valuable information, therefore it's valuable content. But we actually have to take a step back and say, okay, well, what's the most precious commodity or precious resource that anybody has, which is time. And when somebody pays attention to your content, they're paying in their time. And so when we think about it from that approach, you're saying, hey, I'm asking this person to watch my video over scrolling and immediately finding something that will be infinitely valuable and entertaining to them. I'm asking them to spend their time, their limited time they'll never get back, on my content. When we think about it from that perspective, it makes it really far easier to understand why content doesn't take off when we just kind of, maybe put it out there with no strategy. So I recommend take a lot of time to test. Make short form video content because it's easy to produce. I just do it with your iPhone. Don't spend a bunch of money on a whole studio until you start to find, okay, well, these topics, these really work. And as long as that, of course, is relevant to our brand, then let's start investing and doubling down into maybe long form or maybe podcasts or things like that when we know it's a topic that resonates with the right folks.
So, question about posting is that, yeah. So start with short form. Eventually, you can, just because you can do them more efficiently, more efficiently, certainly. And my question is, how do you measure the effectiveness of a short form video?
Yeah. So there's a couple of key KPIs, key performance indicators that I think make the most sense for folks. And so you have reach, which is the number of individuals your content gets in front of. If you post on Facebook or Instagram, hopefully you're doing this with a business account. I highly recommend it. A lot of people use personal accounts. You can. It's harder to track this information. So that's why the benefit of the business account exists. So if you make a business page and you make like an Instagram account and you attach it to your Facebook and all that annoying hoops that they make you jump through, when you go into your insights tab or you go into meta business.facebook.com, which will open up what's called Meta Business Suite. Apologize that Facebook makes everything super difficult, but they
They
do.
do. They sure
Uh,
do.
it's when I was there, I was like, why are you making it so tough for people to use your stuff and to give you their money? Because the ads platform is nuts. Like
It's nuts.
it's so complex. I'm like, this is so counterintuitive. But anyway, um, if you go through it and you make like a Meta Business Suite account, which should be fairly easy, you might already have one, not even know it. You can track all of your results here. And the main KPIs I would focus on is reach. That should be your bread and butter in the beginning. Because again, if we're putting out organic content, we can market for the most part, especially if we're staying on brand and not just making crazy trend videos because we think it might go viral. If we're talking about the stuff that is on brand for us as a business, as a real estate agent, then we should know our reach is going to be getting in front of people because it's registering with what they want to see. So reach is probably the biggest one. Impressions, people get the two mixed up. Reach is the number of individuals your content gets in front of. Impressions are the number of times, like your video, for instance, has been seen altogether. So let's say 5 people, you reach 5 people, hopefully way more than that, and you get 10 impressions. It's every person saw it probably two times,
Right.
basically. That's how that works out. So the reach is really the most important thing. Um, but you also have things like of course click-through rate. If you have content that clicks through depending on the platform, that will show you really high levels of intent. But I wouldn't focus too much on things like likes and comments, just because people can love content and not comment on it. I don't
Oh,
comment on anything.
well,
Yeah.
this is a podcast. We not I shouldn't say never. Rarely do we. I mean, we do get our listener feedback. We get them in the way of people leave reviews or they email us. But 99.99% of our listeners have never reached out to us or done any sort of engagement other than download and listen to the episode.
Yeah, and you know what's I'm working with a real estate agent in Florida. They had an amazing story. I'm so glad they shared it. They said they started making YouTube is kind of their platform. They started making YouTube videos for a long time, for like years. They had I believe it was a listing agent reach out to them and they said, "Hey, you're representing Lisa on this home purchase, right?" I don't remember the name, but let's say it was Lisa. They said, "I don't know who this person is." They said, "Oh, that they said that you're their agent." Turns out a viewer of this person's content had been watching them for so long. They called up about a house. And then when they asked what was the agent, they just named the agent that they've been watching forever, which is so funny and kind of the
Yeah,
perfect scenario for any real estate agent out there.
right.
Um,
That's the dream right there.
but they have no idea because it's not like this person DM'd them or
Right.
commented or anything. It just goes to show the power of views is really strong there, regardless of if they hit the like button or even the subscribe button or the follow button.
And it's because their people are wired for connection, and through social media we're looking for people to relate to connect with. We're looking for problems to be solved, but it's
Yep.
all interpersonal, right? So we have to think about these social media as this interpersonal exchange, and to really think about how do I service the people with this content. So okay, so we talked about the metrics of looking at reach is most important. How just as a general example, how often do you think someone should be making video content and posting?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the only hesitation I have about should is because everyone is different.
Right.
And for instance, like let's say you have an amazing strategy of, I don't know, cold emailing. Let's say you get a ton of business from that. Social media, I'm biased toward it, but it's just one marketing avenue.
Sure.
Like, so I would be wrong to say like, hey, take time away from this amazing cold email strategy that's getting you business and throw it into testing the waters in social media. But what I will say is that ideally, I would make a video once per day. Not actually because of algorithmically there being some secret there, but just because if you do anything once a day for long enough, A, it's not that hard to do, especially if you just film it with your phone, talk about things that you already know about. I mean, you can make content really in 60 seconds and post it pretty much immediately. It's not much of a lift. Everyone has time for that. And if you do that every day for a month, you're going to build a habit. And once you build that habit, it's not like, oh man, I got to jump through these hoops to make the social media content. It'll be second nature to you. So I would recommend that if you're brand new. Honestly, at the end of the day, really the more content, the better. The only thing I'll say is that one platform I've seen a little issue with is I wouldn't post more than like 2 times a day to Instagram. Tends to have negative results. But for the most part, the more content you have, the more people you'll get in front of, but also the more information you'll have, which makes you make better choices and build a stronger strategy. And it becomes very difficult to fail when you have that much information and data on your side.
We should also mention too that strictly the act of doing this exercise daily, making a short form video each day. I remember reading a book by the person who mentored Mr. Beast. It was an
Mm,
analytics guy, and Mr. Beast basically said, "Assume your first 100 videos are going to be just terrible." He
yeah.
says, "Don't worry about it; they're going to be, and once you're done with them, you'll look back on them and you'll know what I mean." But he said, "But the good news is you're going to get better at it every single time." So that I think is also something that agents can forget is they post some videos, they don't have the whatever metric they're looking for, the result isn't there, the engagement isn't there, they didn't get phone calls, there weren't likes, there weren't comments, and if they're still developing their skill set and they're still continuing to try to improve, then ultimately, if they just keep going down the path, they are going to get better at it. And if they're looking at their analytics, they're going to know what's working and what isn't. And if they hire somebody like you can actually help them figure all of this out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's really like one of my favorite quotes, and I apply it to marketing, though it applied to military before, was just that was a Napoleon quote. Oh my god, now I'm forgetting it. It's something along the lines of, like volume is essentially a benefit in and of itself, right? I'm butchering the quote, but essentially it's that, we talk about like, oh, well, what should I be wearing? Like, what kind of light should I use? What kind of microphone should I use? And we do that, but like the power of just doing something over and over again, no matter what your starting point is truly the biggest compounding vehicle.
Yeah.
It's if you do something 100 times, like in the Mr. Beast example, eventually you will suck so little you will actually be good.
Right.
And
It's
that's
not
and
about
that's one
even
of my
getting
favorite
good. It's
quotes.
about sucking less. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
eventually it is a spectrum. It's not like you're good or bad. It's how good are you? And so eventually you will be so bad at being bad, you'll actually be good. And that's one of my favorite quotes when it comes to content creation.
And we could get into deeper conversations about the uh, sort of the nature of content, whether it's a content that's disposable or content that sticks around. YouTube is more of a stick around. It's a search engine, so it's a repository. It is. I like to think of it as it's well. I think AI is now taking over this mantle, but prior to AI being accessible to the rest of us, was like our Oracle at Delphi. This was our answer. Google and YouTube were our answers. We or this was what we said, mysteries of the universe, and they will give us those answers. And now, this when we have content that people will we call evergreen, that they'll content that can kind of live indefinitely because it's applicable all the time,
Right.
then you could put some of that content on some of those more repository like social platforms like YouTube, where if I have a really good video on a particular neighborhood in Syracuse that people are searching to learn about, well, that might serve me for years and years. I mean, maybe I'll have to update it at some point, but it will
Yeah.
serve me while I'm sleeping. It will be there. Whereas if it's on Instagram or Facebook, it tends to be more disposable. People aren't, I mean, they could look at your previous posts and they could find it, but it's not. Facebook and Instagram really aren't search engines. I mean, technically they are, but it's not really how people use them.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great way to put it too. It's that there is a massive power of evergreen content. When we work with real estate agents, we try and make content topics that are almost exclusively evergreen for that very reason. Um, that being said, and you are 100% right, that the evergreen aspect of content on platforms like YouTube are far stronger. But I will, I had a funny instance where actually two funny instances from one client who actually happened to be before we really dived into just working primarily with real estate agents. We were working with a wine company. We actually still are, but they created a video which is how to use like a wine opener, right? This like electric wine opener. They put it up on YouTube years ago, 5 6 years ago, before I ever met any of them. Uh, to this day, every year that video accounts for probably 90% of their total views because every year on December 25th, everyone opens up that Corvin wine opener brand and they don't know how to use it and gets what's the go-to video of how to use it.
Yeah,
This video this guy made 5 years ago, which is so funny. But
yeah.
and another funny note though too is that generally there is more short-term aspect on platforms like Instagram especially. um we had a video that like I was looking up for a client the other day that I was going through and I saw a bunch of likes come in. I'm like, oh man, they really like the new piece of content. It's a video from 2 weeks ago that's still resurging just because it was some user generated content. People really liked it and it was funny, and that kind of took off. But it is very funny. I do recommend people, if you really want to benefit from content as much as possible, evergreen will serve you the best just because you're giving yourself a longer horizon for people to discover it and get value from it.
Now, tell us about Jarvis Media. What do you do specifically for real estate agents?
Yeah, so appreciate that. Our main focus is again giving really tangible results for people without having to become a content creator. And so we do this a lot of ways. What we ultimately really have kind of found a niche in is creating hybrid content. What I mean by that is hybrid between organic and paid. The reason for this is because if you're a real estate agent, you have very limited time. You have to make content, to be relevant on social media, but your time has a monetary value itself. So for agents who are at a certain level, we find, hey, let's make the best piece of organic content we possibly can, and then implement a really minor, very like a scrappy paid budget with it as well. That not only helps us get in front of more people, but target more specifically too, which we can't do as much on the organic side. So we've built our whole model out of having agents come on. We do a 1 hour a month call with them. We get a whole month's worth of content, and then we edit it all, deliver all the content to all their platforms, so that they can focus on what they're best at, which is being an awesome agent.
So let me make sure I understand. So the idea is, make a really great piece of content, and then possibly because it's somewhat disposable on Facebook, Instagram, we'll use a paid campaign to redirect attention back to that content. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, we'll squeeze that organic orange for as much as it's worth, and then implement that in a paid strategy, which allows us to target again more specifically and test more accurately, because then you start to get out of the weeds of like, well, maybe Tuesday more people saw than Wednesday. You start to really get a much clearer representation of the content that resonates when you're able to A B test so perfectly with ads. And that's how we help to make content that just gets better and better month over month. And again, the time savings is really what people care about. They say, how can I work with you and just do 1 hour a month? You help me make the content, and then I can just focus on the other aspects of my business that are super important.
Yeah, I love that. And if anyone is interested in working with Cole, and he has had some unbelievable results. Remember, he worked at TikTok and Facebook. He knows how the sauce is made, and how the sausage is made. We would say in Chicago, but but certainly he is if there's nothing more frustrating than creating a good piece of content that we know is good, but because we don't have the right strategy to distribute it out to it's not that necessarily the audience rejected the content, they might not have seen it. And
Yeah.
this is something that happens with just listed and just sold posts all the time. Is somebody says, hey, I just did this cool thing, and here's a picture of it, and they don't get a lot of likes, and they're like, oh, I guess people weren't happy for me. No, it's that Facebook probably knows that that's not a super engaging post, because it's just basically an advertisement for yourself, or a little congratulatory thing. They understand that's pretty disposable and doesn't really help their platform all that much, so they're going to push that content down, and they want something that really grips somebody and wants to keep them on. So the idea is, you might create this great content, but you don't exactly know how to push it out the right way. That's where you guys can come in and say, hey, we're going to throw in some paid strategy as well to really manually push some eyeballs over to this, because that will give us the real feedback on how it's working, and then we can just continually make updates. That is a brilliant strategy. I love that. I love that. So for anyone out there that is interested in working with Cole, Jarvis, Cole Jarvis, sorry, Cole, what is your website
Jarvis
again?
Media.
Jarvis Media.
Oh, jarvismediaco.com. Sorry.
Sorry, jarvismediaco.com is where you go. There's a link to that in our show notes. Cole, what's the best way someone should reach out to you? They can go to their website and find you there as well.
Website's fantastic. Also, we just get a lot of people who call in. Sometimes that's the fastest way to get a hold of us. So if you want to call 315-751-8103, we take a lot of calls that way. And sometimes people, I got a call the other day, last night at Sunday night, that was somebody was just like, hey, I need a strategy right now. So if that's easier, then that's a great way to get in contact with us too.
Wonderful. Well, reach out to Cole. Jarvis Media is where you go. Link to that in our show notes. Just to recap a couple quick things. Cole said, hey, let's first figure out where your audience is hanging out. Where do you hang out? Let's focus on that platform. And then let's start figuring out, how do we solve problems for people that are on that platform? How do we answer questions that our clients ask us? How can we create short form, quick content to then start getting into the habit of doing this daily, and then we can start really getting fancy by hiring somebody like Cole to come up with a better marketing strategy to actually direct more and more eyeballs to that content. Cole, this has been fantastic. I really encourage our audience to reach out to Cole, and they can, Jarvis Media Group is where you want to go. They are everywhere, and we have links to them on our show notes. Cole, thank you so much, and we will see everybody on the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks so much, DJ. Really appreciate it.